Welcome to the Abridged Presidential Histories with Kenny Ryan Austin, Episode 20B, an interview on the assassination of James Garfield and what it's like to have your history novel turned into a Netflix miniseries with author Candice Millard. I'm excited to welcome Candice Millard to the show today. Candice is the author of numerous compelling history novels: The River of Doubt, about Teddy Roosevelt in the Amazon; Hero of the Empire, about Winston Churchill in the Boer War; River of the Gods, about the search for the source of the Nile; and Destiny of the Republic, about the assassination of President James Garfield by Charles Guiteau. The last of those, Destiny of the Republic, was just turned into a Netflix miniseries released this month titled Death by Lightning. My wife and I are loving it. We're 3 episodes in. We're loving it so far. So we're going to talk about James Garfield, the assassination, and what it's like as an author to have one of your books turned into a hit TV miniseries. Candice, thank you for joining me.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Very welcome. So what has this moment felt like for you to see one of your books turned into a major Netflix miniseries? Every time I tune in, it's like 1 or 2 on Netflix right now.
I know. I mean, it's definitely surreal, but it's been a lot of fun. You know, this is the first time I've done this, so I don't know, but I hear that it can go terribly wrong and you can possibly hate it, and you just have to tell yourself, oh, well, that's, you know, my book is a different thing from the adaptation. But in my case, it's just been the best experience. You know, Mike Makowski, the creator and screenwriter, reached out to me 6 years ago. And it, you know, for obvious reasons, it's taken that long for someone to greenlight a Netflix series based on James Garfield, any period piece, but especially based on James Garfield. And, you know, it's one of those things. He's very young, and he was obviously even younger then, but had already done some really impressive things. And he's just, he's really smart. He's really passionate about the story. He took it very seriously. He cared about it as much as I did, which is really saying something. And so just over the years, you know, he would reach out to me, give me updates. You know, sometimes there'd be progress. A lot of times like, oh, well, that didn't work out. And I just kind of went about my life. You know, I live in Kansas City. I'm raising 3 kids, working on, you know, different books along the way. And so just it was kind of fun getting these updates. And then, you know, when it was greenlit, was really like, wow, I guess they're really doing this. And then I would get updates about the cast, which is just insane. It's just the most insane cast, you know? And I was like, my God, this is incredible. And obviously, you know, Benioff and Weiss, the creators of Game of Thrones, are behind it. And Netflix really just, you know, went all in with this. And I think, in my opinion, at least, it really shows. You know, it's beautifully produced. The cast is incredible, but it all revolves around Mike's script, which he was very closely to the actual story, which I really appreciate. That's hard to do, especially in just 4 episodes. But it has a very modern feel to it, which I think is fun and really necessary to, you know, bring viewers to the story, especially young ones. So anyway, overall, just a great experience. It's been really fun.
That's awesome to hear. And I'm curious, how involved did you get to be in production? You know, was this kind of like the kids off to college, I really hope everything turns out all right? Or are you more involved?
No, that's definitely, that's a great analogy. I wish them well. And I know enough about myself to know that I don't know anything about that world. I don't know anything about screenwriting. I kind of stick to my own lane very happily. And so I would just, if I had any effect on it, it would be a negative one. So they knew I was there if they needed anything. And again, he would give me updates. And, you know, obviously I saw the script. I loved the script. And I told Mike at the very beginning, I was like, look, you know, a couple things that I really care about. And the main one was just Garfield's character. Because when I was writing the book, you know, when I started writing the book, I didn't know anything about Garfield. And we can get into this later, but I didn't start with Garfield. It just kind of ended up being about Garfield. So I I like any writer of history, or journalist, I try to come at it with complete objectivity to see
Yeah.
what I find. But what I found is a really extraordinary human being who was completely forgotten. And, being a human being, I formed an opinion. And that one was of someone who really admired Garfield. I really admired him. I came to care about him. And so I felt like, this was really a decent human being, a great leader. And I wanted that to be clear in the series, and it absolutely is. So that was reassuring. And so, I just have been on the sidelines, and since it's come out, they've been so great about including me. He puts, up front and center that it's based on my book, and he talks about that, and they invited me to the premiere, and we did a showing in Ohio, and he's really included me along the way, which I really appreciate.
That's awesome. Yeah. In the first episode, I read the book, and my wife asked me, is Garfield a good guy? And I said, yes, and he'll be almost the only good guy in this story.
Yeah, that's right. So just be prepared.
Yeah. What has been your favorite part through the whole experience? Was there a moment from development or a favorite scene that you're moved by to see in production, or like a casting that you're like, I can't believe we got that person to play that person, anything like that?
Well, again, all of the cast, I just think Betty
Amazing.
Gilpin is really, really good. She just brings so much power to Lucretia, which I really love, because, I was very limited in what I had to work with, as often happens when you're trying to write about a woman in history. You don't they didn't have the opportunities to have these positions of power where everybody was paying attention to what they did and writing about them. So I had, what she wrote, her letters with Garfield and other people's impressions, but not as much as I would want. And he really brought her out. The series, and Betty Gilpin really makes her a very strong character that I think is very true to who she was. And obviously Matthew McFadden is just unbelievably good as Charles Guiteau. He's just an incredible actor. And what I love about his performance, many things, but I've always felt that Guiteau he did this horrible thing. He was also, and I get into it somewhat in the book, but he had a wife briefly, and he treated her horribly, just, terribly.
Yeah.
He was unbelievably cruel to her. He was arrogant, and he was selfish, but he was ill. He was mentally ill. And he also had been, abused by his father. He had a horrible father. He had a very traumatic childhood. And you can't help but pity him.
Yeah.
And you can't help but, I don't know if you don't like him, but you feel for him, and you get all of those nuances, and his life is darkly funny as well. I mean, it's bizarre, and he says these very strange things, and he is in these strange situations like the free love commune, and all of that is absolutely true. And you see all of that in Matthew McFadden's performance, I feel, and so that was incredible. And I'll tell you one experience that I had with Michael Shannon as Garfield, because as I said, I had just studied him for many years, and I felt like I kind of knew Garfield in a way. And I went to Budapest where they were filming. I just went to set for a couple of days. And when I got there, I was fresh off my flight, from Kansas City to Budapest, checked into my hotel, brushed my teeth, and they took me right to the set. And I walked in, and Michael Shannon was dressed like Garfield. They were filming the convention scene.
Excellent.
Right, which is so great. It's
awesome.
So well done. And I saw he was standing on stage in this incredible set, just like the convention in Chicago. And honestly, it took my breath away. It was like seeing this man I had come to admire and I had studied for so long. It was like seeing him come to life. And I wanted to shout at him, watch out, don't take it, don't do it. It's not going to end well. You want to,
Yeah.
and that's the kind of the sense I tried to get into the book as I wrote it, like,
Hmm.
since, switching between Guiteau and Garfield, and here's
Yeah.
Garfield,
Yeah.
living his life, all these things are happening, totally unaware that there's this tragedy coming
Yeah.
towards him. And I wanted the reader to feel that.
Yeah.
And I felt that, when I was there, when they were filming. It was really, a strange, but very powerful experience for me.
Yeah, that is awesome to share. Thank you for sharing that. And let's
Uh-huh.
start diving into the story that is at the heart of this. I
Hmm.
mentioned I love your book, Destiny of the Republic.
Thank
Highly
you.
recommend it to listeners. What first attracted you to the story of President James Garfield, who you just mentioned you knew almost nothing about? The assassin, Charles Guiteau, the guy who kind of actually did kill Garfield, Dr. Bliss. How did he even find
Right.
out about all this?
Well, so my first book was about Theodore Roosevelt, but it wasn't like I was because people always assumed, oh, you wanted to write another book about another president,
Mm.
and that wasn't the case at all. I had worked at National Geographic for 6 years, and I was steeped in stories about science.
Mm.
And I really loved that my
Oh,
first
yeah.
book had a lot. It was set in the Amazon, had a lot of natural history in it, and I
Yeah.
wanted another book with a lot of science. So I was just doing random research, and I was researching Alexander Graham Bell, just like, I
Okay.
wonder if, anything in his life.
Yeah.
And I stumbled upon the story of him trying to find the bullet in Garfield after Garfield was shot.
Oh,
He
right.
invented this
Yeah.
induction balance, the first metal detector. There was no medical x-ray at that time.
Right.
And I was like, why don't I know this? It was like Alexander Graham Bell. Everybody
Yeah.
knows Alexander Graham Bell.
Yeah.
And a president of the United States, one of only 4 who had been assassinated. And I've never heard that story. And so I thought, I wonder what Garfield was like. Honestly, it was just that, like, I wonder what Garfield was like.
Uh-huh.
And because, like most Americans, unfortunately,
Yeah.
we only know that he's been assassinated. And so I started researching him. And I always say my husband's always my victim here, because when I start with a new idea, I'm calling him and interrupting his work, saying,
Yeah.
guess what? Guess what? And so I was like, oh my gosh, Mark, this Garfield was brilliant. He wrote an original proof of the Pythagorean theorem. He was an incredible classicist. He knew Latin and Greek.
Mhm.
He had a heart to match his mind. He
Yeah.
hit a runaway slave. He was instrumental in black suffrage. He helped to found the Department of Education. It was just like, oh my gosh, this guy was extraordinary, and he was modest, and he was brave, and he didn't want to be president, and he was thrust into this role in this crazy situation. And then, yeah, as you say, then I was like, wow, I wonder, who shot him? Oh my gosh. And so it was funny because Mike, again, the creator of the series, and I always laugh because he's like, it's almost too much.
Yeah.
The strange, like the coincidences and the absurd story that is all absolutely true. In fact, you mentioned this doctor who really killed Garfield by inserting his fingers and instruments unsterilized again and again when he should have known better. And as you know, his first name was Doctor,
Which
his
is
name
amazing.
was Dr. Willard Bliss, and they didn't put that in the series because, well, for 2 reasons. One, Mike was like, it's just too strange. People are like, that's so stupid. For sure, that is not true. And then also, you don't meet him until the final episode, which is obviously the episode where Garfield is shot and is dying.
Yes.
And so there's no point. It just becomes, a lot of the series, as you know, if you've just watched this for it's funny. There's a funny situation. I mean, it's weighty.
Yes.
And it's tragic, and it's, it very fascinating, but there's really some funny, Chester Arthur's character, everything.
Yes.
But by the time you get to this final episode, there's no place for humor. They're just, and, he said that he had thought about having Lucretia say something like,
sure,
his first name is Doctor, but she was like, when am I going to be putting this silly thing in? There just wasn't a place for it.
It's a good point. It's a good point.
Yeah, for sure.
And so you mentioned like there are just so many memorable characters in the story, and as you read it and or watch the show, you just keep being like, these people are all just so much larger than life. So I'm curious,
hmm
when you were doing your research, who was your favorite to learn about and why?
Well, it had to be Garfield again
Okay.
because I came at it not knowing very much and
Yeah.
just learning more and more about him. Just for your listeners who don't know anything, I mean, he was our last president born in a log cabin and
Mm.
born into extreme poverty.
Hmm.
His father died before he was 2. He didn't have shoes well into his own childhood in Ohio.
Hmm.
So his mother and his older brother scrimped and saved to save a little bit of money to send him to college because he was clearly so intelligent. But still, he
Mm.
had to pay his way through school. His freshman year, he
Right.
was a carpenter and a janitor.
Yeah.
But he was so smart that by his sophomore year, when he's still just a student himself, they made him a professor of literature, mathematics, and ancient languages. And as I said, then he was this incredible classicist, wrote original proofs of the Pythagorean theorem while he was in Congress. I mean, I'm sorry, name me a member of Congress who can do something like that today.
Yeah.
They just don't exist. We have some very smart people, I'm sure, but not to that level. I mean, he just was just incredibly brilliant and did some really, really good things while he was in Congress. He was a hero in the Union Army during the Civil War. And so just, the kind of person you just wish we could have
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
any kind of leader, certainly, as president of the United States. And that
Yeah.
the fact that we had him for such a short time.
Yeah.
And I do believe, I will say, I honestly believe, and Mike agrees with me, that he would have been one of our great presidents.
Hmm.
For all those reasons I've just said, but also because he didn't have what he referred to as presidential fever. And he said that
Mm.
he had watched so many of his friends, good men,
Hmm.
succumb to this presidential fever. And what it meant is that they were kind of willing to do pretty much anything
Yeah.
to get to the highest position in the land. And so they kind of sold their souls along the way,
Right.
and at least made compromises that he was just not willing to make. And it's not that he never thought about becoming president. I mean, obviously he was in politics.
Sure.
He was an incredibly powerful speaker. He had gotten a lot of attention. A lot of people had been like, "Oh, hey, would you think about it?" And it's not that
Sure.
he wouldn't want it, but he wasn't willing to make those sacrifices, the sacrifices of his own principles and ideals, and what made him an interesting and, I think, again, decent human being. He wasn't willing to sacrifice those.
Right.
And then when he's not a candidate.
Right.
He's kind of thrust into this role. He becomes suddenly president of the United States. How does that never happens?
Right.
So he was in a uniquely powerful position, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
he went into this office not owing anyone anything,
Yeah.
which is extremely rare and very powerful. And I think anyone could do some real good with that if they wanted to, and he wanted to, but he was denied that opportunity by
Yeah.
Guteau and by his doctor.
So I want to probe more into this kind of accidental president thing, because to hear James Garfield tell it, he wasn't trying to become president in 1880. He was just trying to give a speech nominating some other guy at the
Yeah.
Republican National Convention, and he
Yeah.
accidentally gave such a good speech that he was nominated instead. Do you honestly take Garfield for his word here, or do you think he was trying to become president? Maybe trying to become president in a way that didn't require all the sacrifices, like you say. Did he think that this speech was going to lead to a nomination?
I mean, I do believe him. Like I said,
Yeah.
I don't believe, and I don't think he would have said, "Oh, I've never considered it." Right?
Yeah.
Oh, no, I definitely would never want to be president. Although when he gets into office, and it's the height of the spoils system, and he's forced to meet with office seekers every single day. Any
Right.
average person who wants a job at the post office gets to meet with the president personally.
Yes.
And it was taking all of his time. He didn't have time to read and think and work. And he was very frustrated. And he said, "I don't know why anyone would ever want this job."
Right.
But again, so he was always an incredibly powerful speaker. That's one of the things he was known for. And he used to joke that he had a fatal facility with words. So get him started and off he would go, right? And he cared very much about things. He was extremely knowledgeable about a lot of things. So you ask him to speak, he's going to speak. And he's not going to pull his punches, right? And so John Sherman, who was William Tecumseh Sherman's younger brother, Secretary of the Treasury, also from Ohio, like Garfield, he wants to run for president. And he hears rumblings of people saying, you know, wow, Garfield would make a great candidate. So he, you know, intelligently, I mean, it wasn't a bad bet, although it didn't turn out well for him. He thought, well, kind of to stop those people who want Garfield to run, I will ask him to give my nominating address. And by the way, I know he's an incredibly gifted speaker, so he's going to give a really good one. And Garfield, you know, he went to Chicago without a speech. And so he's trying to come up with a speech. The night before this, the convention, he has to share his small bed with another man, a stranger. One of the other people at the convention knocks on his door and is like, hey, you know, my brother's here. He doesn't have anywhere to stay. Can he stay with you? So he had to sleep in his bed with the other man. I mean, again, these crazy things. So he had gotten no sleep, and he goes there with an idea of what he's going to say. And he really changes listening to Roscoe Conkling's nominating address for Grant, he, which is really tempestuous, right? And everybody's worked up and they're chanting Grant, Grant, Grant. And Garfield is a completely different personality, totally opposite end of the spectrum from Roscoe Conkling, and gets up and gives a very, very different kind of speech. So you go from people, you know, just kind of a wild frenzy to just silence. And they're listening to him speak. And it's so powerful and beautiful and inspiring that they all just kind of quiet, and they're kind of spellbound. And they do such a good job. Michael Shannon does an excellent job of giving that speech. And it's absolutely what happened, you know. And as he's giving it, he says, my friends, I ask you, what do we want? And someone shouts, we want Garfield. That did happen. And again, he's not a candidate, and the votes start coming. So, you know, you could say, oh, he really wanted it. I don't believe that. I mean, again, he was not very old. He was just in his 40s, late 40s. Had he thought of it? Sure, of course. I'm not saying he never, ever, but did he go there hoping that this would happen? Of course not. There's no way. I mean, you know, the chances, I don't think that ever occurred to him. I think he thought, I'm going to go there to give a nominating address for John Sherman. And as he always did, I'm going to give the best speech I can because this matters and I have a platform and these are things that I care about. So I'm going to say them. And he did. And then this happened.
And then he's nominated. He wins the election. He becomes president. And then he's president, and he finds there are some very powerful people standing in his way, including his vice president, who cannot be trusted.
Right.
How did Garfield try to navigate that opposition? And I'm curious, too, like, what lessons could politicians today learn from Garfield and how he tried to navigate when you have powerful interest groups lined up against you?
Well, as you say, you know, he had sort of definitely enemies within, which I think does happen all the time, certainly happens today. So at that time, there was a big rift in the Republican Party. There were the stalwarts who wanted to protect the spoils system. And then there were what they called the half-breeds. So they're like, you're not really Republicans because they wanted reform. And Garfield was a half-breed. And his vice president, Chester Arthur, was a stalwart. So Chester Arthur was wholly the product of the spoils system. So this man, Roscoe Conkling, who'd been a senior senator from New York, and he controlled the New York Customs House, which was which took in 75% of the entire country's customs revenue. So very, very powerful position, and he wielded it, right? And he had been the man behind Grant, and he was one Grant to have a third term so he could kind of run things from behind. And he was furious when Grant didn't get the nomination, and he decided that he would make himself Garfield's enemy. What happened is that the party knew that they couldn't win without New York. They needed New York's help. They needed New York's votes. So they needed Roscoe Conkling. And so what they did is they said, okay, Chester Arthur, who is your man, Conkling had made Arthur the controller of the New York Customs House. We'll make him Garfield's running mate. Garfield didn't have any choice in the matter. He was just thrust. And then when they won and Arthur is his vice president, you'd think, oh, maybe Arthur would come around. No, he's still completely Roscoe Conkling's man. He often lived with him when they were in New York. He went on vacations with him. He spoke openly about Garfield, criticizing Garfield openly. So, and then as soon as Garfield starts, he's trying to put together his administration. Roscoe Conkling starts polling. So any person that Garfield would name to position in his administration, and you see it in the series, it's absolutely true. Roscoe Conkling would have them literally dragged from their bed in the middle of the night, brought to his apartment, actually, which people called the morgue, and threaten him. And the person would drop out, like, oh, sorry, Garfield, I actually can't take that position after all. And so there was this real clash. And Garfield ended up winning that, and I won't get into all of that, but he did win, and it strengthened the American presidency, the position of the American presidency. But I think, I don't know. I mean, I'm not a politician, so I guess politicians would take what they want from that story. But in general, I think the moral is, if you believe in something, stick to it, stick to your guns, and don't give in. And the interesting thing, to me, the most interesting thing about this story is this particular story within the story is Chester Arthur's transformation and how much he changed after Garfield was shot. And he cut off Roscoe Conkling. And it's a really very, very interesting and absolutely true transformation that no one saw coming. And so it's kind of inspirational. And so you see, sometimes very corrupt politicians, and you think, oh, there's no way they could ever change. Oh, there is a way. They just have to want to.
Yeah. So Garfield, he ends up getting 4 months to try to make a difference in the White House before Charles Guiteau, a disillusioned, and is it safe to say crazy, supporter and patronage seeker, shot Garfield in the back at a train station. And then it took 2 months, more than 2 months, for Garfield to slowly die. What impact did Garfield's death have on American politics in the 1880s? Was there a soul searching, a reckoning? What future do you think was lost?
Well, I think, I think we lost potentially one of our great presidents. I think he would have made a lot of progress in the areas especially that he cared about, which was rights for freedmen, which was education, which had been his own salvation. He also, in smaller ways, he was a strong advocate for hard money, so gold backing the dollar. He, was sort of thought globally, was already reaching out to Latin America and things like that. So we lost a lot, but as sometimes happens, and we're lucky in this way, there are silver linings. I mean, for one, Garfield died not from the bullet. The bullet didn't hit any vital organs, didn't hit his spinal cord. He almost certainly would have been absolutely fine if they had left him alone. He was killed by his doctors, and he died from just horrific septicemia. So he just riddled with infection by the time he really, really suffered before his death. And people realized that. And when the autopsy results came out, his doctor was, sort of publicly humiliated, and sepsis was accepted and went on to save just countless lives. So that was a huge difference. And his death brought the country together in a way that it hadn't been since the Civil War. With Lincoln's assassination, there were a lot of recriminations, and the North felt the South had killed their president. But Garfield was really one of the first presidents since the Civil War where all of America felt like this is our president. He was seen as the president of both the North and the South, and their shared grief brought them together in a way that was extremely healing, and that the country really needed after this horrible war and this deep, deep divide. And so that absolutely changed the course of the country.
Yeah. Speaking of countries changing, Destiny of the Republic was published in 2011, and I feel like we're always looking at history through the lens of the current moment to try to help us make sense of now. And now is very different than 2011. So is there anything from the story that your perspective has changed on, or that you think is more resonant today?
Well, to me, one of the things that Garfield said that's always stayed with me, and that I think that we could all use today, is he used to describe himself as a poor hater. People used to say, wow, that journalist really attacked you, and yet when you saw him on the street, you would say, hey, how you doing, you old so-and-so, or that other politician, cheated you or tricked you or, was against your bill. And he would always forgive, and he would find ways to connect and work together still. And he would just shrug and he would say, yeah, I'm a poor hater. And I think that if we could have more people who are poor haters, just think of the difference that would make if we could sit down and listen to each other with genuine respect and with genuine humility. And, I really think that, any time, any place in history, anywhere in the world, that would make a significant difference. And we see so much animosity and so much tension today. And if we could all be, poor haters like James Garfield, I think we'd be so much better off.
I really like that answer. The last question I have for you, I ask this of everybody, what lessons in leadership can we learn from James Garfield?
Again, I think you have to stay true to yourself. And I think that happens fairly rarely in politics, because I think by the time you get to any position of real power and real prominence, you have had to make compromises along the way that you didn't expect to make. And I don't know much about politics. I think to some degree that, if you want to, and they kind of address it a little bit in the series, even Garfield was in some positions where you okay, if you want to get elected and be in a position where you can make a difference, sometimes you have to, again, make compromises that Garfield, to a large degree, did not make. And so I don't know, is it possible? I don't know. I'd like to believe that it is. So anyway, that's what to me, that's what is one of the things that's so admirable about him, is he didn't compromise his principles along the way. And I would personally love to vote for someone like that.
Amen. If you've enjoyed this interview with Candice and want to learn more about James Garfield, pick up Destiny of the Republic from your favorite local bookstore and grab a seat on your couch to watch Death by Lightning, which just dropped on Netflix this month. You can also learn more about Candice and her books at CandiceMillard.com. Thank you for your time, Candice.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Abridged Presidential Histories. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, tell your friends and family about the show, and write a 5-star review on your podcast listening platform of choice. If you'd like to support the show, you can look it up on Patreon, or go directly to www.patreon.com/abridgedpresidentialhistories. This helps me buy books and pay to host the show, and thank you so much to everyone who has contributed so far. The music in today's podcast was a public domain recording of the United States Army Old Guard Fife and Drum Corps. Thanks for tuning in, and see you down the trail on Abridged Presidential Histories.